Today, we are talking about Juneteenth. Are white folks allowed to celebrate Juneteenth? Why or why not?
The Black experience in North America, in the United States, is not a trend. It's not new, it's not fashionable. It has roots, it's real, and it's relevant. So respect it and acknowledge it.
Good day and welcome to the Accomplice Podcast. I am your host, the other brother, and today we are talking about Juneteenth. I want my guest to really give you the lowdown on the holiday, the background, the history, and all of that. But just as an introduction here, a little bit for those who may not be familiar or maybe just hearing about Juneteenth for the first time more recently. Let me just give you a little bit of background, and then I'm going to introduce my guests for the show. So Juneteenth, basically, despite President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation issued on January the 1st, 1863, more than 2 years, get that, 2 years later, June 19th, 1865, the announcement of General Order Number 3 by Union Army General Gordon Granger proclaimed freedom for enslaved people in Texas. Now, that made Texas the last state in the Confederacy with institutional slavery. 156 years later, Juneteenth is now recognized as a federal holiday in the United States. That decision, or that was established on June the 17th, 2021. So over 150 years to establish this holiday. With that said, I want to introduce my guests who are going to talk about this subject with me today and enlighten all of us on the history behind Juneteenth. So first of all, I have Mr. Rodney F, along with his lovely wife, Debbie, joining us from the lovely island of Grenada. Rodney is originally from Houston, Texas. He's a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin. A retired Staff Exploration Geophysicist with Shell Oil Company, responsible for managing oil and gas exploration plays in the search for oil and gas discoveries across North American basins, onshore and offshore. He's also a former general manager of Lindstrom and King Company, a manufacturing company in the plastics industry in New Jersey. Also with us today from Dallas, Texas is Bobby Slaughter. He is a fiber technician with Frontier Communications in Dallas, a graduate of East Texas State University, now Texas A&M Commerce, with a Bachelor of Science degree in computer science. And of course, my guy, CJ Stewart, joining us from New York City. He's a native of Dallas, Texas. CJ is an actor, writer, photographer, artist, and activist. He holds a bachelor's degree in theater from the illustrious HBCU Prairie View A&M University, and as well an MFA in acting from the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire in the United Kingdom. Gents, ladies, welcome to the show. Glad to have you all here today. So we're gonna start it off. I'm gonna kind of go around here and engage each of you in this discussion. But first, I want to start with you, Rodney. Give us a little history as sort of the elder statesman in the group, and from Houston. And as you told us earlier before the show started, your family actually has a really long history in Texas. So can you tell us, just give us a little bit of a background, elaborating on some of the historical points there. What is Juneteenth? What is the history behind this holiday?
Well, Juneteenth, as you mentioned in your intro, represents the last state, the last group of enslaved people to be released from institutional slavery during the Civil War. There were a number of reasons why Texas was the last to receive. It was the westernmost part of the states in rebellion, and most of the skirmishes were further east. But there was also, and people say, well, news traveled slow. They were aware of the Emancipation Proclamation in Texas, but because you did not have Union forces to enforce it, the slave owners chose to ignore it and until you had Union soldiers there, it was an unenforceable act. When General Granger showed up and made the announcement, it still took some time for it to reach all across Texas. Again, because slave owners wanted to get their crops in. Until there were troops to enforce them, they weren't going to do it. So even after June 19th, 1865, there were several months before it was universal freedom across the state. My family has a long history in Texas and long history with celebrating Juneteenth. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, it kind of reached its zenith. There were parades, there were celebrations. Interesting fact is that because of the Jim Crow laws that were instituted, in a lot of cities, it was unlawful for blacks to gather in public spaces. And so Juneteenth celebrations took part in churches. Sometimes they took part outside of city limits, around streams, rivers, or lakes. In Houston, for example, I believe it was in the 1880s that a group of ministers and people pooled money to buy 10 acres to become a park that they could celebrate in and gather in. That park is still in existence. It's called Emancipation Park in Houston. Similar things were done elsewhere in the state to have places where Juneteenth could be celebrated. In the early 1900s, it kind of reached its zenith. It started to go down, again, because of the Jim Crow laws and segregation. Following World War II, it had an uptick, but again, in the late 50s, early 60s, it started to dwindle again. But with the civil rights movement, it started to become more celebrated. And Juneteenth was taken to other states. You've probably heard of the black migration from the South to places like Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, Minnesota, to the West Coast. People from Texas took the Juneteenth tradition with them to those other states, and it began being celebrated outside of Texas, outside the South.
Really, really interesting. Thank you so much for that detailed history. And it's interesting that you said the last part that you said there, because my first I guess introduction to Juneteenth would have been probably in the early 90s. I used to teach for the Head Start program in Seattle, and one of my colleagues was from West Texas, and she and her family celebrated Juneteenth. So that, and that was about as much as I knew about it. I mean, just the very basics. But it really kind of seemed to me to be sort of a Texas thing, and okay. The other key point I want to talk, Bobby, I want to come to you now about this. As Rodney said there, it took 2 years for this announcement to make its way to Texas. And even then, there were still delays, right? You and I have talked a little bit about this on the phone and whatnot, but just to kind of give it some perspective here, like, granted, okay, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have the internet at that time, satellite, okay, fine. But we're talking the 1860s. You've got telegraphs, you've got trains, you've U.S. kids learn about what the Pony Express, the mail riders that raced all across the country on horseback to deliver the mail and all that kind of thing. Talk to me a little bit about this concept. It took 2 years for this information, this announcement, to come to Texas, Bobby.
Come on, man. With all due seriousness, I would have to defer some of the answers to my previous brother. That was true. They wanted to get the crops in. Okay? Here's what it is. Labor. My friend, that's all it was. Either this day, if someone can give me more information on it, I still believe that to this day. Okay? Now, I want to share guys. My old roommate, frat brother, Billy Wilson. He's big in the NAACP. More of a better, I'm sure, candidate that I think I'll hear him out. Okay? Hear him out. Well, I'm sorry, once again, brother pretty much said it all in. Once again, it was about the Union soldiers, and they had to be enforced. So, let's say you had the Union soldiers wherever they went. That's where the word was spread, and that's where people started feeling their freedom and being able to get out from under the master whip. Yeah.
Thank you for that. A surprise guest, and it's always good. That's the thing about the brotherhood of Alpha Phi Alpha. All these gentlemen that you see on the show today are my fraternity brothers. So I do want to thank them especially for their participation. But it's always good to have a brother that you can call on, Brother Bobby, at your side. So Brother Wilson, welcome as well to the show, and thank you for the insights. So. With all of that in mind, I want to come to the young cat in the group, if you will, Brother Stewart, CJ Stewart. CJ, talk to me now. I mean, and again, I'm not picking on you because you're the young guy, but you've come up in a little bit different era than the rest of us, okay? And your education, so forth, has been more recent than ours. So. Talk to me about your perceptions. When did you start learning about Juneteenth? Was there anything in school as you've come up in the last, couple of decades and whatnot? And sort of where were you introduced to the history and the holiday?
Okay, so I want to say my earliest experience before I get to my university. My earliest experience, I remember being at a park when I was very, very young. I didn't know what we were celebrating, but I knew it was a holiday. And I think I knew that my mom told me we were celebrating Juneteenth, but no one explained to me what it was, right? So I just knew it was a Black holiday, right? There was barbecue, there was music, we were celebrating, but I didn't necessarily just know. And it happened at this specific park in Dalworth, Texas, every Juneteenth. I went there for a couple of times, but I think I was just too young at a time to really understand the weight of what it was or what it was, right? So when I came to know Juneteenth, it was at Prairie View. I was actually, and who introduced it to me was my professor, Dr. Crystal Chanel Prescott, which was the head of my theater department. So what happened was we were getting ready to do a show called Black Nativity. And in this show, Dr. Prescott, she created the Black experience through a timeline and the things that, from slavery until where we are today. And I remember auditioning for it, and we had to sing Lift Every Voice and Sing, right? We had to sing that, which is the Black National Anthem, something that I did not know. And I just remember struggling with it. But within that, like Dr. Truscott, she also was like teaching us that, this is something that is not really taught in the educational system, as well as Juneteenth, just because of how it's designed. And she told us that she made sure that we knew what it was. So like even before we did this play, we did one of her projects, which is based around the actual holiday of Juneteenth, called, if I'm not mistaken, it was called Peaches. And what happened was we were like telling the story of how Juneteenth was created. And we just went through like the history. We went through General Granger's proclamation. We went over like every little detail that happened. And that's where I first learned it. And I remember after that, I was just like, wow, so this is what I was celebrating when I was younger. And my family, I think my family kind of, like, to be honest, I'm not even really sure. I don't even know if I really just asked them how much like they just really know about it because of going to the park. I think my mom knew, but it wasn't something that we like always celebrated, right? It was just something that was going on. I know it was a Texas holiday because when I was at Prairie View, I was closer to Galveston, and I had friends from Galveston. And since it happened when General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and gave the announcement, it's a celebration there all the time, right? And I remember going to a Juneteenth celebration with one of my old friends in Galveston, and like just really immersing myself into that tradition and that culture. And since then, I've been celebrating it ever since. And that's really my relationship with it. I know me and my peers in general, we didn't really know what Juneteenth was. Most of us, like my friend from Galveston, she knew, and a couple of people know, but a lot of us were learning at Prairie View about this holiday.
So that right there was Lift Every Voice and Sing, written by James Weldon Johnson. And this version was sung by the Manhattan Harmony 4. Now, for those who don't know, this is referred to as the Black National Anthem. So you notice I took off my hat to pay all respects. This is an anthem and should be respected as such. This was written again by James Weldon Johnson in the 1900s. And he actually wrote this as a poem. And then he contacted his brother, John Rosamond Johnson, and said, can you put music to these lyrics? And that's how they came up with Lift Every Voice and Sing. The song was first performed by 500 school children in the segregated Stanton School, actually for Abraham Lincoln's birthday in Jacksonville, Florida. The first recorded version of this song was in 1923 by the male gospel group Manhattan Harmony 4. So that was the version that I played. Since that time, there have been various renditions, whether it's been Kim Weston out of Motown, Stevie Wonder, Anita Baker, and actually recently, Beyonce had done one of her Coachella performances. This song was actually endorsed in 1905 by Booker T. Washington and became the official song of the NAACP in 1990. So given that we're speaking about Juneteenth here, the importance of this song, I believe, is self-evident. As Brother Stewart had mentioned before, it was a song that they had heard during their celebrations. And this song is one that spread out since being created in the 1900s throughout the United States. And we even hear it here in Canada when we're celebrating Black History events. So that's the reason I picked the song. It is the anthem, and it was very, very meaningful for this particular topic. So that's my choice.
That's why we call him the ambassador, because he brings us so much knowledge and wisdom through the music, and always appropriate, always right on time, and big ups to you, man. Mad respect, because I think as we talked about it, that was the perfect choice given this particular show and everything we're talking about today. And I'm gonna get ready to go to brother Bobby and also Billy Wilson in Dallas here. But before I do, just this will give you a smile, Frat. when I was pledging, the Big Brothers came to me and said, we have a special project just for you. You have to learn this song. So there it is. Brother Bobby, I'm going to come to you next, you and Brother Billy. And I want to ask the two of you, you can join in on this one together. How did Juneteenth gain notoriety? As I mentioned earlier, just a few weeks before we are recording this podcast, June 17th, 2021, the United States makes Juneteenth a federal holiday. Can you talk to me a little bit about that process and how did that come about? What were some of the steps to get there? As I mentioned, it's 156 years after the event. Talk to me about that a bit.
Now, listen, personally, it's all overdue, and that's all I got on that. It's just overdue. Unfortunately, I don't have anything else to say about it. Maybe Billy can expound on it because he's big with NAACP, but me, myself, it's just long overdue. That's it. Okay. Yeah, I'll expound it. I also did mention to you, I'm an educator, a recently retired 34-year educator. I've been administrating and all that stuff, so start talking about education in Texas. This has been a long battle for us. And you say, how did it spread? It was spread through word of mouth and through a lot of our educators. So we've always had people who have taught us different things. That Juneteenth, as Brother mentioned earlier, was that time for those things that you learned at your church or at your family gathering, whatever it was when you learned. Well, we all came together and kind of did those remembrances together. You said West Texas. I'm not sure if that friend of yours from Odessa, but that's where I'm from. And so we're kind of far removed from Houston and Galveston. But my parents were sharecroppers, and we got off the farm in 60. So I was born in 62. But even on the farm, we had these remembrances. We moved to Odessa, which is a little bit larger town. There's the Juneteenth celebration. I went to Booker T. Washington Elementary. I went to Phyllis Wheatley Kindergarten. So these remembrances have always been passed on through us, and it's just, and as people leave, like I say, people leave Texas, people learn about it, it's the right thing to do. Everybody has different dates. Texas wasn't the only one. You know, Mississippi has a date, Arkansas has a date, wherever the Army went, there's a date. We just celebrate it out.
Rodney, please expand on this, because I know you have some thoughts on it.
Well, I'm going to make us proud of the shield here a bit, since it's all frat here, but the process of Juneteenth becoming both a state and national holiday, we owe to a fellow fraternity brother from Houston, Brother Al Edwards. He's sometimes called the father of Juneteenth. Brother Edwards comes from a family, he was the sixth child of 16. Get that? He was the sixth child of 16 when they're in Texas. He was elected as a state representative in 1978. Backing up a bit, he was initiated into the fraternity in the graduate chapter that I was in there in Houston, Alpha Eta Lambda, I believe when he was 38. He came in through the grad chapter. When he was elected as state representative, one of the first things he did was he filed House Bill number 106, I believe, to establish Juneteenth as a state holiday in Texas. This was in 1979. You can imagine he had a lot of opposition in the state legislature and around the state to establish that, but he was able to get the bill passed and signed by Governor Clements. And Texas was the first state to establish Juneteenth as a paid holiday for state employees. Al Edwards established a national Juneteenth organization to try to get it spread throughout the country as a state holiday. And that culminated in this year it becoming a federal holiday. I believe there's 49 states and District of Columbia that either have a state holiday or some official observance of Juneteenth. But like I say, this started in 1979 when State Representative Brother Al Edwards, as a freshman legislator, introduced this bill in Texas. Unfortunately, he passed last year, and he was not able to see this established as a federal holiday. But like I say, we owe a lot to Al Edwards because he, as you can imagine, he took a lot of slings and arrows from both sides of the aisle and also from blacks and whites trying to get this holiday established.
Thank you for that, Rodney. CJ, I'm going to come to you, man. So, 1979, this holiday gets established in the state of Texas, and I know that's a little before your time, but it takes all the way to 2021 for this to be recognized as a federal holiday. What are your thoughts on that?
I think what I'm most happy about is like what I found out. I think last year and like this year, as it's made a national holiday, is a lot of black folks did not know what it was still to this day. And since Juneteenth is the official Emancipation Day, I think it's history. It's important, and I do want all black people to know about it. I know like it's a Texas holiday, and we've been celebrating it for some time. And I've seen so much push and pull on like social media and stuff like that, and I understood like both sides and just what people were saying about the workforce and everybody being off and stuff like that. But I think what I'm most happy with is the history is so important to me. Shout out to Opal Lee, the nicknamed grandmother of Juneteenth, who followed our brother's work and made it a national holiday. But I think what I'm most happy about is all black people being able to celebrate it and benefit from it, and just know about the history of it, just because around, I guess, the world, or in specifically the U.S., so many people did not know. And I was reading so much about people who was like, I never knew this. No one ever taught me this, and just thinking about like the kids and people growing up knowing more of their history that, may not have been shared with them. Because, a lot of this stuff of me growing up, if I want to just hark on a little of my experience with the educational system, no one really taught me about slavery. We learned about the civil rights movement, MLK and Rosa Parks, shout out to Brother MLK and Rosa Parks, and the people that kept peace. But we didn't branch into Malcolm X. We didn't branch into slavery. A lot of that information, as well as Juneteenth, and Juneteenth being a Texas holiday, was not fed to me. Nor my siblings, nor my brother, nor like just people that I'm surrounded with. So I'm most happy that the younger generation and older, if there are any older that don't know, because you never know, But I'm happy that this is a thing now, so that people can grow up and ask questions. Ask questions about this stuff, especially in the educational system where you have to confront it. And Texas is doing this thing where it's like, oh yeah, the U.S. is doing this thing where, not Texas, the U.S. is doing this thing where they're like, okay, let's make this a national holiday. However, let's ban slavery from being taught in history books. So, it's another thing of like, how are we going to do that? Now that we're about to make this a national holiday, what's going to happen when we want to celebrate, when kids want to celebrate Juneteenth in school? When kids want to talk about it and things like that. It's like, how is that conversation going to be brought about? What are people going to talk about? It's just hypocrisy within America. But to answer your question, going back to it as simple as I can, I'm happy that all Black people get to know about this, just because this is information being held from us, for people that, because everyone don't know.
You're listening to the Accomplice podcast. When we come back from this next break, we are going to dive in and talk a little bit more on what, CJ, you actually kind of touched on it, and that is Juneteenth is a Texas holiday. It originated, the event, if you will, took place in Texas. It is now a U.S. federal holiday. We're going to talk a little bit more with my guests about that aspect of Juneteenth. And we'll be back right after this break with the ambassador. Lift every voice and sing. Thank you to our musical director, the ambassador, for that. And we are talking about Juneteenth here on the Accomplice podcast. My guests, Rodney and Debbie Witcher, CJ Stewart, Bobby Slaughter, and Billy Wilson. And CJ, since you kind of alluded to this a moment ago, I want to come back to you first. And I want to ask the question then to you. You're a native Texan. You're from Dallas originally. Is Juneteenth, should everybody celebrate it in the United States, or is it really just a Texas holiday? What do you think?
I think all Black people should be able to celebrate it. I don't want to hinder our history, because it's not. I know like that the slaves in Texas were the last to be set free, but it's still our Emancipation Day, right? I don't think it's just secluded to Texas, because it's a day that everybody should know and everybody should experience. It's sacred to Texas because that's where it happened. It's the South. That's where the information, was delayed. However, I would love that all Black people got to celebrate it, and not just in one place.
Rodney, I want to ask you this in relation to this idea, is Juneteenth a Texas thing, or really should it be celebrated as a countrywide national holiday in the United States? Your family having a long history there, and understanding that not only was Texas part of the Confederacy during the Civil War, but for a certain period there was basically its own country, the Republic of Texas. And my perception has always sort of been that Texans are sort of, it's the Lone Star State, and Texans are sort of have that pride and sort of almost their own kind of little world, if you will. What do you think? I mean, is this a Texas thing, or should everybody be included across the U.S.?
I think it's something that should transcend the whole country, because yes, it's Juneteenth, and what happened in in Texas was the impetus for it. But it's really, people take note of when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, but they really don't attach a lot of significance to it because it was an order that only affected a portion of the country. It didn't, it affected the states in rebellion, but some border states that also had slaves, the Emancipation Proclamation did not speak to that situation. And there were some other dates, but Juneteenth represents kind of freedom, not just for slaves in Texas, but for blacks in the country as a whole. We know that there was a lot of things still to challenges and whatnot, but that's a date that we can mark in the sand and say this was a significant date in not just the blacks' history, but in the country's history. Because July 4th, we know, was not freedom for everybody in the country. We know that. And so this is a time that we can say, at least administratively, at least philosophically, everyone in the country was free. And so I think it should be celebrated and taught and educated countrywide, the significance of this date and all the things that have come since then.
Amen, brother.
Bobby and Billy, I want to ask you this. I've seen, CJ mentioned, all the banter on social media, and there's many different opinions and views and so forth. One of the things that I saw somebody posted was they said everyone should celebrate Juneteenth because even though the Emancipation Proclamation was laid out by President Lincoln in 1863, everyone wasn't free until Juneteenth. And so that really is the marker. In other words, the idea being that everyone isn't free until we're all free, kind of the concept. What do you think about that?
When we got it 2 years late, everybody else was, come on, let's think about it. The black American wasn't able to go out there, let's say, I'm just going to move over here to Chicago and I'm going to get a job. No, it wasn't like that. Okay? So, personally, when Texas got that, I think everybody should be included with that because now everybody is free. That's just me and my thoughts. Bill?
Yeah, I actually got to speak with Miss Opal Lee, and that was really the point for her, is that, and once again, there were some people even after this date that still didn't get the word and were still being bombed. But this is the date we chose, as the brother said. This is the date that we're going to put a marker in the sand. This is the date that we're going to celebrate freedom for everybody. And so, yeah, even though it's a Texas thing, that's what Miss Opal Lee wanted it. But this would be the date that we could celebrate freedom in America, because July 4th is not it. And so that's why they went forward. They said this is not just a Texas thing. This is a United States thing. Not to mention, now with the holiday, how can they block us teaching it? Because as you said, in Texas, Mike Moses, our frat brother, I've never met him, the head of the Texas Education Agency, was part of them taking the word slavery out of the books. It's the triangle trade now. Greg Abbott's talking about we want to teach the true Texas history. Is he going to go like the brother was talking about 1832 when Texas left Mexico because Mexico wanted to free the slaves? That's why we separated from Mexico. And so is that going to be taught? The 1619 Project, all of these things we're saying need to be taught so that people can understand the history, and hopefully you don't repeat it, because as we know, these things come back. And so that's the whole point. Let's talk about the freedom struggle in America. Juneteenth, let's celebrate freedom for everybody. Let's talk about that. And let's pull the sheets off and talk about Travis and the Alamo and what that was really all about.
Here's another part that strikes me, and CJ, I'm going to come back to you to start this off again, because the United States is known probably globally, if it doesn't do anything else really well, it knows marketing. The United States knows how to sell a product, okay? And I mean, there's so many different things that have been so commercialized. I often wonder, it cracks me up actually in a way, some of these holidays that have been sort of adopted and commercialized in the U.S. I mean, I think more recently, Cinco de Mayo being one that, you know, and anybody who knows the actual history behind that date and event, it's just very interesting to see how people throughout the United States have adopted that. But even something like, and I'll just give myself as an example, growing up, like St. Patrick's Day, right? Everybody wants to wear green and drink beer. And what's funny to me about that one is, because I actually grew up Catholic, and a good part of my family is actually from Ireland. And if you know the history of who St. Patrick was and Catholicism and Protestantism in Ireland and that whole history, to know that there's all of these, well, I guess it's referred to as WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, who are celebrating this what is actually a Catholic holiday in this commercial fashion. I mean, that to me is the kind of thing that comes to mind when I see some of the commercialism in the United States. So I want to ask you, is the United States making Juneteenth a national holiday? Is it really substantive, or do you have some concerns that it'll be just, you know, another day off work and another thing to have a party and a celebration, and the true meaning, the true essence of it will be lost?
I think when I heard about it becoming a national holiday, other than me being happy that, you know, our people can celebrate this day, I was concerned a bit about it becoming commercial and something that, like, lost in America's commercialization, which you sometimes, as you just mentioned with Cinco de Mayo and St. Patrick's Day, you know, it's so commercial that no one really even asks, like, what's the history of this? Like, how did it come about? You know, we just celebrate it. We just go eat tacos, and, you know, it's just something like that. So, I mean, that's the danger of America. Like, the things that I'm, like, most concerned about are reparations. You know, it's like, what are y'all, now that y'all are going to make this a holiday, our holiday, you know, how are we going to receive reparations from this, from America? And I'm not thinking about anybody else. I'm thinking about us, because we were the ones enslaved, right? And the danger of it is, like, you know, thinking about a workforce is like, you know, are they just going to give us off, or are they going to give everybody off? I mean, these are just things that I thought about that just I don't really have the answer to. I just hope that, you know, I know America to the fact that they might next year, you might see a Macy's email come up talking about 50% off of the Juneteenth sale. You know, it's just weird stuff like that, you know, and that is just something that is a red flag, because I just feel like, you know, let's really think Juneteenth is, you know, it's something that we should really, I know, like, for me, it's a day where I thank my ancestors all the time, but you reflect about how far you've, where you've come from and how far you've gotten, and the people that have sacrificed for you so that you may be here, right? And just being alive, and just, you know, just where we come from, right? And I just don't want commercialization to take that away, this real meaning. Because we're gonna celebrate and we're gonna do what we're gonna do, but, like, thinking about America and the educational system and how everything becomes whitewashed, that's just something to look out for, something that I'm curious of.
Billy, you know, in the work that you do with the NAACP and so on, and you mentioned the education system as well. So do you have concerns, or what do you think about the impact, again, that there's this national holiday now, and yet there's all the resistance to the actual teaching of history. And even like lately, the term now critical race theory, which I mean, I will say that I vaguely understand it. It's a fairly new term, but at the end of the day, history is history. Like the truth, the facts, the actual information. So do you think that we're just going to get lost in sort of, as CJ mentioned there, whitewash over the real history, the real facts of Juneteenth and what it means, what the history behind it is, because now, oh, hey, here's this holiday, so that makes everything okay?
I'm a man of faith, and so I think our energy is strong. When you speak truth, it comes out. And I think of the Memorial Day. Saw when the guy was trying to give the true history of Memorial Day, they cut him off. So when you see that type of stuff, that they'll try to keep trying. But I'll tell you how we'll know for sure. Next year when we celebrate Juneteenth, we should be able to talk about political struggle, freedom. Once again, that's what Juneteenth is about. It's about the legislation finally getting passed and the country doing what it should do, which is giving to the all. Well, when you talk about the John Lewis Act, when you talk about critical race theory, you see once again, they're the same people that set the history. There are those who want to oppose it, and they're going to continue to fight, but you can't fight for truth. So as long as we not give it, as long as we celebrate focusing on the freedom struggle, what's important now, how where we are now relates to where we were, then yeah, they really can't stop. But yeah, it's going to be commercialized just like Memorial Day and everything else. That's what they're doing.
Brother Rodney, you have a home abroad. You and your wife live in Grenada, at least part of the time. I'm just curious to know your perception or thoughts about Juneteenth, maybe even being understood, and should it be celebrated or acknowledged, or what? From an international standpoint, I know the brothers here in Canada, we've had discussions in and around this. So, what are your thoughts about telling this story, telling this history on a global scale?
I think it's very appropriate. As I say, we're here in Grenada in the Caribbean, and the Caribbean countries have their own emancipation. Each individual country has their own emancipation days, their own emancipation story. And so the particulars may vary from place to place. The dates, the years will vary from place to place, but the struggle and the story is the same. And so I think Juneteenth as a representation of people who were enslaved, people who did not have equal access, property rights, freedom of movement, and so forth. I think that story and struggle for freedom is what Juneteenth represents, regardless of your particular location. And so I think it's something that can be adopted anywhere to highlight the struggle for freedom and equality of humanity around the world. Because we experience it as slavery, say, in North America, South America. But you have Indians, Native Americans, who have similar stories, similar histories. In other parts of the world, it's others. And so this Juneteenth story is a story of struggle for freedom and equality around the world.
I'm so glad you said that, because it really reminds me of what our brother Dr. King said, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And as I travel around, as I meet people from different places, what you say is so key, because I think a lot of times we have this thing that's programmed into us that we're so very different because we speak a different language, because we look differently, because we come from a different culture, like different music or food or whatever, that we're also very different. And yet there are these things about us as human beings that tie us and bind us together. Like you mentioned, each of the Caribbean countries has their Independence Days that they celebrate, and the different festivals and things that coincide with that. Here in Canada, we celebrate Emancipation Day on July the 1st. In Toronto, we've been commemorating that with the Freedom Train ride for the last number of years, and everybody gets on board the transit and goes in silence up the track, and there's a whole program in and around that we've been celebrating, COVID accepted, but that commemorates Canada's emancipation. And many people don't even know that there was actually a period of slavery in Canada, for example. So these are the things that the stories, the information that I think that we really have to keep telling and keep making people aware of. And as I like to say, we find when we talk to each other that we have more in common than we actually have differences. With that, we're going to go to our last break with the ambassador. Lift every voice and sing.
I just want to speak on this a little bit. As I mentioned in the previous section, there's been many renditions of this, but the reason I picked this particular rendition was because it was the first recorded in 1923, basically to symbolize the roots and the history of this anthem, as well as we're speaking to Juneteenth. So when we're speaking about commercialization, understand and respect the Black experience in North America and the United States is not a trend, it's not new, it's not fashionable. This has roots, it's real, and it's relevant. So respect it and acknowledge it. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. As always, right on time and man, right to the point. Lift every voice and sing the Black National Anthem right here on the Accomplice Podcast. And we're talking about Juneteenth. My guests, Rodney Witcher and his wife, Debbie, Billy Wilson, Bobby Slaughter, and of course, the great C.J. Stewart. This guy, I tell you what, for those that don't know, I keep saying it, and I know he gets a little embarrassed when I say it, but really and truly, this guy is so talented. Get ready, Broadway, get ready, Hollywood. This is the future right here, this fella. So I'm just wishing you the best, man. Well, folks, I appreciate you all so much for joining me today on this show, and I just really want to... I can't even express the appreciation and the gratitude that I have for just all of the knowledge and the experience and the stories, everything. And I think that this is definitely a show for the Accomplice series that folks, man, they're going to get so much enrichment from. It's time for our last segment. This is what I call our rapid fire segment. So basically what I do is we do a round robin with each of you. You'll have just 1 minute to answer the following questions. So put your thinking caps on. And Rodney, since we started the show with you, I'm going to come back to you. Here is the rapid fire question. Are white folks allowed to celebrate Juneteenth? Why or why not?
Absolutely, they should be allowed to celebrate Juneteenth, because in celebration you can have education, and everyone needs to be educated. The more people know, regardless, white, black, whatever, the more people know about Juneteenth, the more we come together. and the more we take down some of these barriers. So yes, I'm 100% in favor of whites, whatever persuasion, celebrating Juneteenth.
Billy, I'm going to come to you next. Should white folks be allowed to celebrate Juneteenth? Why or why not?
Yes, they should, because we're celebrating American history. There's really only one people. Like I say, I'm from Odessa, and there's most of Hispanics out there. So the way we celebrate the SAC out there, and I love Houston too, though, on Juneteenth, on college and stuff like that. So our whole community celebrates. It's not just the fact that, same thing with the NAACP, everybody say, what's the black or crazy? No, it's not. We need to learn about the white people who have helped in this struggle. Go on about abolition all day, but yes, it's not just us. Not just black. It's not.
Bobby?
Hey. Of course. Of course. No, for real though. I have to agree with race. I want to believe. Thank you, Donald Trump. But actually, I think
CJ, last up. Should white folks be allowed to celebrate Juneteenth? Why or why not?
An allyship, yes. An allyship, yes. What Brother Witcher says is important, the education, for people that are our allies and that want to move forward with, anti-racism and things like that. Yes, I do believe they can celebrate Juneteenth. And it also brings about education, and they can go ahead and, pass the information down to their people. So, yeah, that's my answer.
Right on. Well, I appreciate each and every one of you. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another edition of the Accomplice Podcast. My guests, Rodney and Debbie Witcher, all the way from Grenada, taking time out from the lovely surroundings. My man, CJ Stewart, sitting up there in New York, getting ready to take on the world. And, of course, good brothers Billy Wilson and Bobby Slaughter in Dallas. Appreciate all of you. You know what? I'm going to do this, Ambassador. You're a Canadian guy, born and raised in Toronto. You talked a little bit about some of the similarities or commonalities. I just want to get your take, man, on this discussion. And what are your thoughts about, like, next year, as Billy said, looking forward to what will really be the first probably big celebration of Juneteenth as a U.S. national holiday. But what do you think about, Canadians embracing this as well? And just overall the discussion today, man.
First of all, I think the discussion was amazing. I brought up to the brothers before that, given my heritage, being from the Caribbean, as our brother Witcher had mentioned, Emancipation Day was more of a thing that we would celebrate. However, I didn't really learn too much about Juneteenth at all till recently. They started talking about this Juneteenth history, like experience, and I was like, what is this and how it's going to be a holiday? So, getting a chance to learn about that was amazing. And as far as embracing it in Canada, absolutely we should. I mean, first and foremost, the histories between the United States and Canada have been linked. They've always been linked for years, especially as it relates to the Black experience. If we're talking about the Underground Railroad, if we're talking about Black loyalists moving to Nova Scotia, this is centuries and centuries of being linked together. As well, when you're looking at the immigration of many Blacks from the Caribbean up to Canada, I mean, there was a slavery experience as well in that region, South America as well. So we celebrate Emancipation Day. There's similarities that we can see among the experiences of the slaves in both regions, whether it's the United States or the Caribbean and South America. So I think just understanding the similarities, understanding the link between Canada and the United States, as well as the importance of the event in itself, like the freedom of people who never should have been enslaved, who are allowed to be free and celebrate and be the oppression and really show the struggle, the fight that they have to go through. that's an important thing. As a human being, that's an important thing. So we should definitely celebrate it up here.
Right on, man. Appreciate your insight, and as always, your contribution to the show. The Accomplice podcast would not be what it is without our musical director, the Ambassador. Check him out on IG at theambassador_06. Well, folks, that's going to do it for this edition of the Accomplice podcast. Once again, I want to thank my guests, Rodney and Debbie Witcher, Billy Wilson, Bobby Slaughter, and CJ Stewart, as well as my co-producer, Jay Harris, and the Ambassador. Wow, what a conversation. We hope that you, too, have learned something today, and that you will look forward to not only celebrating, but spreading the message, the knowledge, and the history about Juneteenth. Take care.